I didn't know I was going to make this video until the 11th hour, but I've seen so much disappointing discourse on social media recently, revolving around really great modern books and films that do daring things that I personally adore, and that are worth paying attention to and digging into the themes of. And I've also seen a lot of counter-discourse from people saying that media literacy is dead, that people are not good at reading into a piece of art. And I think I've got a unique take to offer here. So I'm gonna throw in my 2 cents. I asked my patrons recently if they'd like to see me talk about this, and they voted yes. And if you'd like to vote on what videos I make, you can do so at patreon.com/WillowTalksBooks. And I need to say up front that some of what I'm going to say here was inspired by and might even parrot what Stoobs has been saying on TikTok. I saw a recent TikTok from Stoobs. If you don't follow her, she's absolutely brilliant. And she talked about media literacy, and it kind of inspired this video. I'm going to repeat some of her points and add some of my own as well. Just so we're crystal clear before we get into it, what is media literacy? Well, speaking as a former English teacher, media literacy is a skill we develop, which allows us to dig into the themes and the politics of a work of art, to analyze everything from its characters and its plot to its setting, to its genre. Media literacy is born from critical analysis, looking at a film, a TV show, a book, a video game, whatever kind of media it is, and asking yourself, what is it saying? What can I glean from it? How can I relate to it? What can I learn from it? What is the point of it? Etc, etc. And there is an argument traveling around social media right now that media literacy is in crisis or dead entirely. And it seems like, understandably so, that this discourse has been more or less born from Poor Things, or at least Yorgos Lanthimos' film adaptation of Alistair Gray's novel, Poor Things. I've gone on record on this channel saying that this book is incredible, and I think the film adaptation is a masterpiece that actually enhances Alistair Gray's novel. You can go watch that video if you want my full thoughts on the film, but it really is an incredible work of art. And I am in this discourse because of that video. I've had quite a few comments on that video from people with very bad media literacy, calling the film evil and abhorrent and cruel and so many other things besides that I don't think I can say in a video. So are people lacking or losing the ability to actually analyze media in a half-decent way? What is the state of media literacy right now? Well, honestly, my first point is that this is not new. I know this isn't new because, unfortunately for me, I am an enormous fan of Gothic fiction. And as a fan of Gothic fiction, I have to spend time listening to people tell me why Frankenstein and Wuthering Heights, my 2 favourite Gothic novels, are terrible, actually. How Victor Frankenstein isn't a good protagonist. How he's actually quite a nasty man. And it gets worse with Wuthering Heights. Because Wuthering Heights is labelled a romance and people don't know what romance and romantic are and how those 2 things are different, people keep talking about how everyone in Wuthering Heights is terrible. They're all horrible, awful people. Who am I supposed to root for? Who am I supposed to like? Oh dear. And every single time I get comments like this, or I just see these kinds of statements on social media, I think, wow, where is your media literacy? So none of this is new. From Wuthering Heights to Poor Things, this has been going on for, I guess, forever. Now, before I give you my take on this, I want to echo some stuff that I saw in Stoobs' TikTok. In her video on media literacy, she talks about how the best art makes us uncomfortable, and how that's the thing that people rally against. That's the thing that upset people about Poor Things. It's the thing that upsets people about Frankenstein and Wuthering Heights. People don't like being made to feel uncomfortable, and so they blame the art that made them feel uncomfortable by saying that it's bad. But why is it important that good art makes us feel uncomfortable? It's because of what discomfort means. Every single time you are made to feel uncomfortable by a novel or a film, you are being challenged. Your understanding of the world, your perception, your worldview is being shifted. And you don't like that and you push back against it. And it is no surprise, it is no coincidence that so many of the books and films that people call uncomfortable, that people hate, that people call monstrous and abhorrent, are often made by minority groups. Women, queer people, black people, etc. And that's exactly why they're important, because these works of art are pushing back against the status quo, and that is inherently uncomfortable. I actually think the most interesting and arguably complicated version of this is The Matrix. If you spend any amount of time online, you probably know that the themes of The Matrix, or at least the surface level themes, have been co-opted by right-wing pundits, including Elon Musk. These people have twisted the themes and the ideas of The Matrix to suit their own cause, their own ideology. Ignoring the very famous and public fact that The Matrix is an incredibly queer film, everything in it is queer-coded, especially its aesthetics. It was created by two trans women, and it is about escaping patriarchy and capitalism. And yet it's the patriarchs and the capitalists that keep twisting its themes to their agenda. Arguably not because they have poor media literacy, although they do, but out of willful ignorance. They want to have poor media literacy, they want to twist it to their agenda. The Matrix came out when I was 9 years old. I am 30-something, 33? I always forget. And whenever I rewatch that film or read something about it, watch something about it, I learn something I didn't realize before. Mostly about myself as a queer trans woman. All of the Matrix films are both complex and blatant in what they're exploring, but everything in those films is presented in such a way that I guess allows for the opportunity for certain people to twist the themes and the ideas and even the imagery of those films to their liking. They talk a lot about waking up while hating wokeness, and wokeness is being awake. They talk a lot about escaping the Matrix when patriarchy and capitalism is about reinforcing the Matrix. That's what the Matrix is a metaphor for. It's fascinating how they've managed to do this and wrangle other people to their cause, but at this point I am going on a massive tangent and I need to get back. I just had to get that off my chest. So The Matrix is a queer, anti-capitalist, anti-patriarchal work of art that people fundamentally misunderstand. And right now, the same thing is happening with Poor Things, although instead of it being twisted to meet the narratives and the ideas of certain people, it is just being vilified. People with a poor understanding of what feminism is are misunderstanding this book and the film adaptation as anti-woman male gaze shit, and nothing could be further from the truth. And as Stoob says in her video, Poor Things is both about how young women, underage girls, are hypersexualized by the media, by men, and I often think back to Britney Spears when I was a kid and how she was hypersexualized, but it's also about the infantilization of adult women by patriarchy. Think about our language, the fact that so often you have men and you have girls. Women can be called girls no matter their age, but men are men and boys are boys, and there is a clear distinction between those two things. The line between men and boys is not the same for women and girls. That is infantilization. This story is partially about that and many other things besides. The ways in which it depicts female autonomy makes viewers and readers uncomfortable, mostly because it is an enormously sexual story, especially in the film. Emma Stone spends half of the film naked having sex with people, and that is upsetting to a certain demographic. And all of this is without me even touching some of my favourite books that often upset people. The works of Ottessa Moshfegh, the stories of Sayaka Murata, many queer and feminist stories that seem to very much upset people and get them all riled up. They feel uncomfortable, and so they think these things are wrong, they are bad, they are twisted. But all of these things are being presented by minority people, and they are so often presented in a shocking and daring and frightening, subversive, transgressive way. And before I go on just listing examples and making smaller arguments, here's my big take. Privilege. People who are upset by the things that they see in films or read in books that make them uncomfortable are privileged. And privilege comes in so many forms. I'm gonna start this with an admission from me. Recently I was scrolling TikTok and I was engaging with this discourse about Poor Things and media literacy. And I saw a really great video by a Black American guy talking about the failings of Poor Things and the magical black man trope. Poor Things has two black characters in it, and both of them are magical. This is a kind of trope and idea that I've seen talked about before, where a story is created by predominantly white people and has a predominantly white cast of characters, but there might be one black person whose job is to explain away injustice, is to be sage and wise in some way, and clearly present political and topical themes to the main character, to the audience, to help the white people understand when there is injustice. It is a very racist trope. It puts weird expectations on black people to teach white people right from wrong. But when he talked about this in relation to Poor Things, something that I have become very defensive about because of how much it has offended other people, I kind of closed up a little bit. I was like, no, not Poor Things. Poor Things doesn't do that. Poor Things doesn't have that trope. Poor Things is better than that. That was me being made to feel uncomfortable because there was truth in what he was saying. He was entirely right, and I didn't want him to be because I am attached to this work of art, both the book and the film. That was my privilege betraying me in that moment. My white privilege. Because privilege takes so many different forms. The most obvious form of privilege, the one that we mostly talk about, is class privilege. When you are rich, when you are upper or middle class, you have privilege over people who are poorer. That's usually what people think about. If you just say the word privilege, you might picture a big suburban home with a swimming pool, something like that. A middle-aged, middle-class man with a decent job, with a nice car, with a family he takes care of, he's privileged. He's definitely white, he's definitely heterosexual, but you can divide all those things up into privileges as well. Straight privilege, white privilege, male privilege, obviously, and cisgender privilege. There are things that cis people do not understand about the trans way of life. And I think privilege is the big problem here. It's the reason why I've seen so many of the people upset by Poor Things being women. Even though it is an inherently feminist story from multiple different angles, exploring patriarchy and feminism through different lenses because it's so beautifully layered, women are still being upset by it. And the likelihood is that these women are privileged. They're probably white women, they're probably cis and heterosexual women. They're going to have a few privileges. Straight privilege, white privilege, etc. Just because they're women doesn't mean they're off the hook, doesn't mean they're going to fully appreciate what Poor Things is doing. And so that's my ultimate take here, is that the reason that there seems to be a crisis of media literacy is because people bring their privilege into everything without realizing it. When you are offended by something, it's because your privilege is getting in the way. Your privilege is putting up a barrier, and your privilege might feel like it's at risk in some way. When you see people getting upset by representation in film and TV, when they see a gay kiss on TV, that is their straight privilege. When you see a black character in a film, when you read a black author make a point in their novel that makes you feel uncomfortable with the reality of the situation, that's your white privilege talking. And again, I've admitted to recognizing my white privilege and feeling very ashamed about the fact that I didn't know that's what was happening. Because we all have privilege in one way or another. And that is exactly why the best art makes us feel uncomfortable. Because it won't make everyone feel uncomfortable. When I read a transgender novel by a transgender writer, I won't feel uncomfortable about certain themes and events and characters, behaviors, whatever, like cisgender people will. There will be cis people who will read the exact same book and they will be made to feel uncomfortable, and I probably wouldn't even understand how they could be so discomforted by that. Because they've got cis privilege and I don't. I relate to the book. But the book will be more shocking, more upsetting, more distressing for people with cis privilege. And that is why the best art makes us uncomfortable. Because it forces us to address things that we'd rather not think about because we live in our own privileged bubbles. So anytime you read a book or watch a film and you feel uncomfortable, think about why. Think about your privilege, whether it be male privilege, white privilege, straight, cis, middle class privilege, whatever it is. Think about it, try and pull that barrier down a little bit and empathize. Because this lack of media literacy is a lack of empathy with the other. And as we all know, the news media loves othering people. And it's at this moment here that we can tie fiction into the real world. When you bring down those barriers of patriarchy and you start to empathize and sympathize with the people depicted in the art or the people creating the art, you're then able to extrapolate that into the real world. And look at how news media, for example, turns certain groups into the other. Speaking about events happening right now, at least in the UK, those groups that are othered, who are presented by the media as monstrous and non-human, are often Muslims, refugees, and transgender people. We are the targets right now. And people see us from a perspective of privilege and agree that we should be othered, that we are different, that we are monsters. But I think a really great path to getting to that point of understanding the othering of people in the real world is through media literacy. Is through watching films and reading books that make you feel uncomfortable and asking yourself why and having an honest conversation with yourself, looking at the themes and the ideas that are being presented in that art from the perspective of someone of a group that is not you, a group you're not part of. Whether that group is queer people, black people, women, whoever it is. This distressingly puritanical approach to art that makes us feel uncomfortable betrays privilege. And I think the divides between groups are the reason for poor media literacy. A lack of empathy, a lack of understanding other people from other walks of life. So watch Poor Things, get uncomfortable, and ask yourself why. Is it because you're a middle-aged, middle-class white woman? Or is it because you're a man who benefits from patriarchy and what you're seeing in Poor Things is making you feel uncomfortable because of your privilege? And that's just one example. Go read Sayaka Murata, go read Ottessa Moshfegh, go read all of these great women who make men feel uncomfortable, and ask yourself why. If you've enjoyed this, support me on Patreon and subscribe for books.